We don't have HR because humans are not resources.
Mm.
Stop treating people like resources would be my one main thing for traditional businesses. The more you treat people like people, the more you get from those people, and the better you get towards a culture where people are empowered, happier to work better together. I think this is stuff that bosses and shareholders don't particularly want to hear because it goes against the dominant narrative. It goes against the logic of the capitalist system, but so do we, and we're still here. I wish more businesses would take on some of that.
Welcome to the first episode in this new podcast series from Changing the Narrative. In each episode of How Not to Do Business, I'll be sharing the experiences of organizations that are breaking convention and succeeding. There are legal, financial, and cultural barriers. There are challenges and mistakes and failures. But each of these organizations has overcome all these by a cooperative culture, where the workers are empowered to make the important, difficult decisions. This first episode features Suma, a whole food wholesaler based in the UK and the largest equal pay workers cooperative in Europe. Suma has been around for almost 50 years and has an annual turnover of around £60 million. So whether you measure Suma against conventional metrics of success or the likes of the well-being of their workers, Suma is succeeding. This is despite the fact there are no managers, no CEOs, or any sort of hierarchical leadership structure, and that everyone is being paid the same regardless of the role and how long they've been at the organization. Breaking convention in this way and nurturing a more democratic, egalitarian workspace is not without its challenges, as this interview with Beau Bulman, a people development coordinator at Suma, reveals. But every business has challenges to face in order to survive and thrive. And Suma's, like those of other co-ops seeking to function in a capitalistic environment with a particular narrative around how a business should be run, is no different. It's just some of the challenges take a different form and are ultimately managed in a different way. In our chat, we discuss the specific challenges Suma faces, both internal and external, and how they deal with them. We discuss the external barriers and forces that make it harder for such organizations to merely exist, let alone succeed, grow, and remain sustainable. Things like financing by a non-extractive means, but also, and this is what I hope this podcast series will address in some small way, the lack of awareness, be it at business schools or within the wider population, that alternative ways of running a business exist and have done for decades, as well as the benefit of supporting such businesses and nurturing a better, fair economic system. Anyway, I hope that sets the scene for this chat with Beau, who has been a member at Suma for almost a decade and is really passionate about what the organization does, what it stands for, and what it and organizations like it represent. Enjoy. For someone who's never heard of Suma, what is it exactly?
Okay, so Suma is, we're as old as punk, 1977 we started. And it was basically a bloke with a van driving around delivering lentils, delivering sacks of whole foods, porridge oats, lentils, beans, whatever. And that took off because it was the late 70s and there was that kind of the good life, back to the land sort of hippie thing going on then. And like I say, the punk movement, vegetarianism was the radical thing at the time. That was the hip and cool and happening, again, for the right reasons, thing at the time. And one person very quickly became sick and they set it up as a workers' co-op. And around the time in the late 70s, there was quite a lot of workers' co-ops. There was a whole network, whole ecosystem around the country, actually, of whole food wholesalers like Suma and shops. So whole food shops were a really common thing. Again, this was a little bit before the complete dominance of supermarkets. So, there was quite a big space on high streets all around the country for that. And so there were all these whole food shops and they needed supply. So Suma was one of the key wholesalers to those whole food shops. And we went on to supply a whole range of other customers. So end users via like food groups. People in small communities would club together, create a food buying group. We'd send our truck out to them and deliver them all their vegetarian whole foods. And we've been doing really well ever since. Basically, since the 1970s, we've gone through the kind of what we call the Gillian McKeith years. if you remember her. You Are What You Eat, Gillian McKeith. We did really well off the back of that. More recently, we've had a kind of real big vegan surge. Recently, there's been the kind of zero waste type shop has come in a really big way. So like reducing plastic packaging, that's something we can cater to really well, bringing you a big sack and filling up your hoppers with it, that sort of thing. So, Suma's evolved quite a bit, but fundamentally it's the same as it was in 77. It's a bunch of worker owners co-running a business to wholesale whole foods all around the UK.
Okay. And before we go into the dynamics of it, you've touched upon the dominance of the supermarkets, and the roots of Suma was at a time where they weren't so dominant. But what about the local food groups? Are they still something that exists, and are they growing at all?
So yeah, the food groups, the food buying collectives, this will be often people in smaller communities, small villages, maybe more isolated rural communities, but equally could be, people on a street in a town or a city. Sometimes it is just one person who maybe they've got a big family or they've got a big garage and they sort of want to shop a few times a year for the dried goods and the ambient goods. They'll get in touch with Suma. We set up an account for them as long as they're not really close to one of our kind of main whole food shops, because we don't want to detract from their offering, because obviously we know how hard a time they're having. But yeah, we set up these food groups, and often they won't have like a weekly delivery like the shops will. They'll have maybe a monthly delivery or even a bi-monthly delivery. In COVID, for example, when everything was shut down and no one was allowed to go out and about, those food groups came back in a really big way. And quite nicely for Suma, we didn't have some of our retail customers at the time, particularly hospitality customers. Things like hotels and bars and cafes obviously were closed. But people really wanted lots and lots of toilet roll, and so these food groups were buying like a bedroom's worth of toilet roll and stacking tins in their garages and that sort of thing. So there was something quite nice about that. A lot of those food groups are stuck with us, and we're always keen to explore taking on more food groups as well. Like that is a really good way for an end user to get whole foods at a cheaper price than going through a middleman. So it's like we're supporting them, they're supporting us. Quite a nice relationship.
Yeah.
Some of those food groups honestly have been with us since the late 70s, early 80s. On a Thursday I work in the warehouse, people come and collect their orders, and I'll often talk to these older folk who've been with Suma for like more years than I've been alive,
Right. Okay.
And so there's a lot of loyalty there, which is
Yeah.
lovely.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. And so beyond what Suma sells, what makes the way that Suma operates worth paying attention to?
Like I say, in the 1970s, there was this quite big movement, quite big ecosystem of worker cooperatives. It goes right back in history to Rochdale, actually. Not the loveliest place now, probably wasn't then either, because it was all industrial and around mills and factories, that sort of thing. But in Rochdale was one of the first worker co-ops. It's an old business model, but it's essentially quite a socialist business model that workers own a business together rather than the maybe more traditional model of one bloke, usually quite large with a top hat in the pictures at least. This instead is a bunch of workers co-own it together. We're not making a fat cat fatter, where we're supporting each other with fair wages. Not all of those worker co-ops around in the 1970s have made it. The model definitely has like a lot of challenges, and I can definitely talk about them. But Suma at least has been resilient, and some of the others have too. I could point out a little map of worker co-ops around the country, and there's still some brilliant ones out there. But yeah, wonderful business model, radical business model for sure, definitely.
And what do you think has made Suma particularly resilient? Where others have failed, what's set Suma apart?
I think good ethics and good effort. Unequivocally, good ethics, good effort. So we've got good values and we recruit to those values. We are looking for people that share the kind of strong values that we have as a worker co-op. But I do quite a bit of recruitment, so this is a special subject for me, I suppose. It's no good having someone with great values if they can't do a good day's work. This is where we have to cohere to the logic of that capitalist system at the end of the day, because we exist within it. Like, we can't bring in people who can't graft. who can't do for example, very physical work that we require. It's often on a late shift. It's driving an HGV around the country for 14 hours a day. This is hard work. I'm sure the work that the Rochdale pioneers did back in Victorian times was hard work. We aren't just a cooperative of people that kind of put our feet up and do nothing. We are workers. We work really bloody hard. So yeah, that's what's got us through, I think, is those shared values, the solidarity that comes with that. That, in a crisis, we club together. When the going gets tough, we get a bit tougher and we get on with it. We had we were a bit short on staff yesterday. A couple of people were sick, unfortunately, yesterday. So before the interview this morning, I've got up early, saw that we were short, come in, jumped on a pick machine, and I've spent an hour out there picking our customers' orders as fast as I could to get them on our trucks as soon as possible and get those orders out. It's that kind of attitude that gets us through. It's that sort of that solidarity, all for one for all type thing. So yeah, good values and good work.
So how do you filter for that then? What is the process of recruiting and finding somebody who has those values and has the work ethic, who is willing to put in the hard work and maintain that level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that we're not infallible and we're not all knowing, so we don't always get it right. We do have like probation periods and stuff. If we interview for Suma's values, so things like dignity, respect, equality, democracy, solidarity, all those things are things we're looking for examples of from any candidates who want to come and work with us. Values are absolutely there in our interview. The interview is probably 50% job skills, can you do the work, and probably 50% Suma's values, do you share them? And so, we have a tough and rigorous recruitment process. We bring people in the warehouse, often we'll bring them in on a shorter term contract, let them try the work, let Suma try them. It's that kind of like, let both parties see if it really works. And through that, they're often doing the hardest work on the latest shift when they first start. We get a really good sense of whether people can do it and also whether they want to, because I'd rather put someone off at interview. Like, we make them lift up a big 25 kilo sack at the interview and we say to them, if this is too heavy, then tell us now, like that's the work that we do. So it's better that people are aware of exactly what it is and they maybe even don't apply in the first place or don't take us up on an offer if we do offer it. Then we bring them in, they get a week in or they get a month in and then they hurt themselves or they can't do it. So, we don't bullshit people, frankly. We don't want to string them a line, bring them in and go, oh, the work's really easy and it's loads of fun. It isn't. It's hard and it's late and it can be dusty and, you get sweaty. I was out there sweating this morning. Luckily, this interview's online and so you don't have to deal with that. But, the work itself is hard. It's not... it's not like we're all sitting with our easels painting constable paintings and having a lovely time of it. Like, it isn't that kind of utopianism. It is hard work to wholesale Whole Foods all around the country. I think we turn over around 60 million a year, so there's a huge amount of physical movements within that. There's a huge amount of 25 kilo sacks to lift and heavy boxes to lift. So yeah, I don't want to string people along and spin them a line when I bring them in. I want to say, yeah, this works hard. Do you really want to do it? And then if they say yes, 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 I say, okay, here's your chance to go and do it. Here's a probation period. If you can pass that, then you stay longer. And you know what? There's actually a second kind of probation process to become an actual member, to become a co-owner of Suma. And that's even more rigorous in terms of the recruitment. It's very competitive. We've just run a bit of that. And, we didn't bring in that many people. Like, the standards are really, really high. And we won't reduce those standards. If the right people aren't there, we have to reduce the amount of people we bring in.
What about people who are maybe a bit older and don't necessarily have that physical capacity? Is there space for them? Is there room for them within the company? Or does everybody have to be able to do everything, or can they just do a handful of different tasks?
So, first up, people who are older aren't necessarily not able to do the physical work. I mean, we've got one chap who I've just been working with in the warehouse. He's in his mid-50s, and I believe he ran 55 miles at the weekend. He's one of our best pickers in the warehouse. So, some people who are older can do it. And, age wouldn't be a barrier for us. It would be about ability. It would just simply be about, can someone actually do it? So in that case, that person can, so that's fine. We do occasionally recruit to more specialist roles. So let's say we really needed someone to come in and run our commerce function, or be big part of something quite technical. We don't necessarily bring that person in and up through the warehouse anymore. We can recruit externally for those skills, and that might appeal to someone who maybe physically can't do the picking. Traditionally at Suma, everyone had to go through that warehouse picking sort of induction. They had to do 3 months in the warehouse and they had to be up to a certain standard. We don't do that anymore for everyone. Obviously, a big part of what we do is warehousing and distribution. So a lot of people, we are recruiting them to be warehouse workers, recruiting them to be HGV drivers. But yeah, there are some other routes in as well. It's just that the majority of our work is quite physical, and like I say, done on late shifts. So predominantly, we're looking for people who can do those kinds of things. But yeah, not wholly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. But I suppose it's fundamental to ensuring that everybody has an understanding from the ground up in terms of how Suma operates, how it works, about its products, about all the different working parts of the company. And by having that understanding, having that oversight, then you can better adapt to peaks and troughs when people are off ill or anything like that. So it bakes in adaptability and resilience.
I absolutely couldn't have said it myself. That's it. Yeah. If I hadn't been through the warehouse, I couldn't have helped this morning.
Exactly.
With getting those trucks out. Well, often we can't do that 5 days a week, for example. I've got other roles and responsibilities here that need doing. I can give a bit. And so the hope is that everyone will give the bits they can, whether that's a bit of extra time or a bit of time before their shift, bit of time in the middle of the shift. There is still that hope that we have that flexibility. To be frank, COVID's made that harder. Hybrid working has made that a bit harder. Obviously, if someone's working from home, for example, they can't then quickly get the boots on, come down and help in the warehouse for an hour or two, So there are more challenges, I think. The bigger that we've got and the more disparate that we've sort of got, the harder it is to have quite as much active solidarity from everyone. But there is still that current of that, and there is still quite a strong culture of that.
Yeah. And then recruiting for specialist needs, because within Suma, everybody earns the same.
Yeah.
So how do you attract people who could maybe earn multiple times what you're offering for a specialist role?
Okay. So first of all, equal pay is not something we're ever willing to compromise on. Like, it's one of our really foundational principles. It's one of the things people love about Suma, and it levels us. It equalizes us. It shows that the work that our housekeepers are doing in the warehouse picking up cardboard is absolutely every bit as important as the work that like our finance team are doing in the offices behind me. So we value the work equally, and that is radical and that is different. I don't think there's very many businesses in this country that do that. People expect wage differentials. They expect more money for certain roles. They expect more money for having worked in a business longer. But frankly, for us, some of the people that haven't worked here very long are some of the people that are doing the toughest work physically, or some of the people that haven't been here very long are working overnight for us, for example, or they're driving HGVs. So there's so many reasons why we think that equal wage system is really important. Equal pay is absolutely wonderful. We're the largest equal pay worker co-op in Europe. We're very, very proud of that title. How do we find people, though, that want a bit more? Well, sometimes we don't. Quite a big part of this is that we train and upskill people internally. We develop people's confidence. We might coach people to take on a role internally that they might have thought, oh, I can't do that, or you need some sort of specialist training externally. Often you don't. Often you need the confidence, the resilience to step up for something like that, and the support to do it. So I'd been, as I said before, a gardener. I'd worked in a slaughterhouse. I find myself at Suma in what you might term as an HR manager type role. We definitely don't call it that here, just to be clear. But I'm doing, what we call at Suma personnel work, because it is people, right? I do a people coordination role. I hadn't done that externally. I hadn't got experience of doing that externally. And I hope I do it reasonably well here at Suma, and I'm certainly glad to do it for the same pay as everyone else. If we desperately need someone, we cast around, and we do fill the positions that we need to fill by recruitment externally. And you know what? Occasionally people take a pay cut to come and work here, which might raise eyebrows, but actually I think part of what draws people to Suma is that it's a good place to be. It's a nice place to work. There's solidarity and community. Yeah, it's quite a good place to work. We get quite a few perks. We get a lot of days holiday a year, and we get a canteen here on site. Not many workplaces have those anymore. We get a meal every day cooked for us, and we get some of the stuff for free. If it's damaged, we get a discount on the goods. So there's a lot of other perks that might draw people in. And often people, when they've earned quite a lot of money for a few years, they might be a bit fed up with the rat race or with working in corporate businesses. And we do find that people often want to come and work at Suma for a change, for doing something different from that. We see it the other way as well. We see it with people internally, maybe who've worked with us for 10 years or something like that. They might take a bit of a sabbatical, go and work somewhere else for a bit, maybe even earn a bit more money, but still come back to Suma because money isn't everything.
No, absolutely. And so then in the culture that develops and that nurtures, what do you think equal pay does to the culture and how people relate to one another?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a great question, and you know, it level in principle and on paper, certainly on the pay packet, it equalizes us. Does it do that in reality? No, because we're not all identical, are we? We aren't all exactly the same person. We're not automatons or robots. So it's a very, very good principle. The practicalities of it can be quite hard. I mean, let's say I'm working hell for leather, working my socks off, really getting a sweat on, all that, and there's someone else stood over there chatting, doing nothing. That might be quite frustrating because it's like, hang on, I'm being paid the same as them over there. That can create some tensions, that kind of thing. Absolutely create some tensions. I mean, if you're being paid twice as much and they're being paid a lot less, you kind of might cut them a bit of slack and go, oh, well, at least I'm earning double what they are. But if you're getting exactly the same as them, there can be those frustrations. And I think, there is quite an ethos of hard work at Suma, and that comes from us being all in it together. And so if people feel like someone isn't working as hard, that can be quite tough, can lead to frustrations, and not everyone's confident at just raising that with someone. It can be quite an awkward conversation, quite a difficult conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So yeah, it does cause some issues, the equal pay thing. Ways of making it fair for everyone as well, trying to make it fair for our London workers, for example. I mean, a lot of businesses do something like a London weighting. Obviously we can't do that because we're completely equal hourly pay. So it makes it harder to attract and retain workers in our London hub, for example. So yeah, there are issues that come along with that, definitely.
Yeah. And so how do you deal with that? Because it's one member, one vote within Suma. So how do you go about dealing with difficult decisions? Say somebody who isn't pulling their weight or some other issue that needs to be addressed collectively.
Yeah, so one part of my role in people development, people coordination is reviewing folks. And we review collectively, so we review teams and we review individually. So we review individual workers as well. And every time we review a person or a team, we seek feedback from anyone and everyone that they work with, basically. So there's an explicit invitation to feedback on your colleagues. We train people to do that. I'm running a workshop later today for some of our members about constructive feedback and why it's so important, and we support people to write it. What we hope is that if there's an issue with someone in your team, let's say there's 5 of you, and Mr. Egghead on the right isn't pulling his weight, what we'd hope is that Egghead's 4 colleagues would feed back and say that this person isn't pulling his weight. Now, it'd be great if they did that directly to him and just dealt with it on that same level, but they can feed back to those reviews, and then you can deal with that in the reviews. It isn't a perfect system, don't get me wrong. Like, people don't always feel confident enough to do that. It can be quite an awkward conversation. There can be some resistance to feeding back to a review. It can feel a bit too much like a hierarchy or too much like a traditional business for some people. So, you know, it is an imperfect system, but then people are imperfect, and it isn't perfect even in those traditional kind of corporate environments with hierarchies. You still get underperformers, and you still get people that don't always pull the weight. So we're trying to do things differently. Generally it works. Like, most people at Suma do work really hard and do pull the weight. Like, the culture is generally really good. Is it perfect? No, definitely not. Every time a member uses their voice to raise an issue, either directly with a colleague or into a review, that helps us get that bit better. And so we just keep encouraging people to do that, really. I'm sure there's a few at Suma that would prefer that we went a bit more corporate with it and a bit more top down, and we had sort of more traditional management hierarchies and stuff. Equally, I'm sure there's some at Suma that would prefer that we had kind of absolutely nothing and just a kind of pure libertarianism. So we're trying to do something in the middle, I guess.
Yeah. And on that then, like, you're non-hierarchical, but are there any informal hierarchies that emerge? People who have been there for longer, people who maybe have more qualifications, whatever might arise that might cause those informal hierarchies, or just friends, cliques.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there's all of that to an extent. I've been involved in other co-ops, in activist groups. I've been involved in lots of different directly democratic groups, varying degrees of democracy within that and stuff. And Suma, like all of those other things that I've been involved in, has informal hierarchies that develop, that ebb and flow. It has structures as well. We do have structures. I'm in a responsible role, a position, coordinator role. I'd say it's more like hierarchy, very light or very soft hierarchy. We don't behave like bosses and managers by any stretch. We're accountable, we're reviewed. We often do other work as well. But, no, it's not without its tensions. Some people won't like some of their coordinators, for example, or other people who aren't in those coordinator roles will have power because they've been here for a long time, or because they're well respected, or because they've, got a lot of experience in a role. We try and have a structure that creates clear enough remits so you don't get those kind of issues. But honestly, it happens. Humans will lapse into hierarchy quite easily, and I think it's about making sure that we're clear who's meant to be doing a thing, who's doing that, what is their remit, what is the start and finish of their remit, is it a temporary thing, what power do people have, what power do the membership have, what power do the collective have. And it's about kind of centering and recentering the collective, so actually the membership is the ultimate authority. All the structures that we create, the coordinators, we have an elected board, there's all this kind of reasonably complicated structure, but fundamentally membership is the overall sovereign body. But yeah, it's hard, and it gets harder the bigger you get, in my experience. The smaller worker co-ops that have like 5 or 6 people, they can make a decision really easily. They get in a room, they talk it through, they can get pure, direct consensus. Everyone can agree to a decision. If one person blocks a decision, that would probably tank it, and they can talk it out until they all agree. With 250 plus members, we can't do that. Every decision we tried to make, one person would be blocking it, and so you get a kind of reverse tyranny. So it's imperfect. We try our best. It's way more democratic than 95% of businesses in the country, probably more. Is it perfect? No. There's loads of challenges. It's hard.
Yeah, I'm sure. But do you think these elements, the working dynamic and consensus-based decision-making, one member, one vote, do you think any of these elements have actually hindered Suma's growth? Obviously, it brings resilience in one form, but then has it prevented it from expanding and more people, more organizations with its distribution?
That's a really, really good question. Well, how long ago is it now? Probably about 15 years ago, I did some work on a master's degree back in Lancaster, and I was looking at the kind of pros and cons of direct democracy, I suppose, at the time. And then one of the things that I looked at and that I found in a lot of groups that were organising in that way was what I kind of called lowest common denominator decision making. Or essentially, you just get a bit stuck doing what you've always done. The default is to do what you've always done, and any change, you've got to get agreement from everyone on, right? So because people can't agree to change, all that happens is you just keep doing what you're doing. And so I think it's like you say, it's a very strong and resilient model, but it is one where it's harder to change. Certainly harder to change on a dime, quickly. I think if you compared, say, a fascist army where you've got one general, or with an anarchist army where you've got none, and everyone had to agree, or the soldiers had to agree, the fascist army would be on the march probably a lot quicker and with clearer objectives and all the rest of it. Sad facts. And so that kind of tallies a little bit with direct democracy in business. It can be easier for a Alan Sugar type character, or a dynamic millionaire or whatever, to make decisions in a business and basically just tell everyone else what to do, than for 30 or 50 or 250 people to all agree on a direction and then all move in that same direction. Yeah, there's challenges. Yeah, it's hard. For me, disagreement is the nature of democracy. The challenge is to disagree respectfully. The challenge is to be able to disagree fundamentally on some things, but still be able to come to some sort of agreement and move forward. Generally, for the last nearly 50 years, we've managed to do that at Suma.
Yeah.
I hope we can continue to do it for another 50, but
Yeah.
it will never be without challenges, like any kind of endeavor, democratic endeavor is.
But what about, say, the London branch? Do the different branches, do they have any sort of degree of autonomy? Because surely, the London branch themselves, it could be argued that they have a justification for, having a London weighted pay, but obviously everybody within the London branch being equally paid. You respect that equal pay within the actual branch itself. But just appreciating the fact that the cost of living within London is going to be greater, the rent and everything else. So then it makes, sense for them to get more money to be equivalent to a living wage for them within London. Yeah. How do the different centres around the UK, do they have any degree of autonomy at all, or is it just
absolutely
centralised?
They do make a lot of their own decisions and organise their own work and things like that. If they wanted to put a proposal into a general meeting to change that, for example, then they could, and then the membership at large could vote on it. There, of course, you rub up against, that would be a change. Obviously, the membership might not vote for it. Some co-ops in the past break up, don't they? They federate out, they separate and stuff. There's not been any proposals toward any of those kind of things yet, just to be clear. Like, this is something in its early days, so maybe it will get somewhere there. Maybe we'll end up doing it slightly differently. Maybe it's just too expensive to do London. All these things are kind of yet to discuss and yet to play for. That's just kind of one example. We probably are. I mean, it's hard to do this at this scale, I think, is the main thing. So that thing about, do you give a team or a group complete autonomy, or how do you do it? We're still making that up as we go, really. Like, there are some teams at Suma that are really, really autonomous and self-managing, and then there are other groups or teams that are much less so, and maybe need some more direction or want some more direction. What we're trying to do is bring in more sociocracy. So there's a sociocracy working group at the moment. That working group is kind of working to seed sociocracy, which is like a newer, directly democratic way of making decisions. And so we're trialing that with some groups, and it has worked quite well so far with the groups that have trialed it. They do quite like it. But as with the kind of older school consensus decision making, it does take time. The more meetings that you have to have, the more discussions that you have to have, the more democracy that you do, the longer it takes generally. My hope is that in the future we can get some sort of slightly more techy solution for decision making thing. There are softwares out there now that can do that. There's some great stuff in the open source software community, but still imperfect, still takes time. So we're in quite uncharted territory, really. Like, there aren't many worker co-ops, full stop, and there certainly aren't really any on the scale of Suma. And part of the reason that we survive is because often we have to just put the work first. Like, we have to just get the picking done, get the trucks loaded, get the whole foods to the customers. And, democracy and decision making can suffer, frankly, on the back of that. Innovation even can suffer on the back of that. Like, we don't have loads of people all sitting around dreaming up lovely ways to change the world. We'd love to do that, but though we're a 60 million turnover business, we aren't making millions of pounds every year gross profit, because we pay ourselves kind of as much as we feel we can afford to. And that means that we don't have 20 million sitting there, or lots of wiggle room in terms of person days. So it's a challenge, really, just getting the work done, and trying to balance that with being a democratic business is hard.
Yeah, of course. And so somebody who's running a conventional business who might be listening to this and wanted to shift a little towards how Suma operates and become more democratic and embrace that, what do you think is the most portable aspect of how Suma functions that could be most easily integrated into, or for that conventional business to take that first step, that evolution?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I could think of 5 different ways to answer that. I mean, one way that I would say would be quite easy, but other people would probably disagree, would be equal pay, or moves much more towards equal pay. And making pay a more kind of collective thing, I think, has huge benefits for everybody, particularly for women, people of color, those that are traditionally more marginalized, that are often paid less still, disgracefully, in the modern world. Moves towards equal pay leveling helps those groups. It helps traditional businesses attract and retain people better. There's so many benefits to that. So I'd say equal pay, or moves towards it, would be one way. Greater decision making, greater power for workers would be another way. So more autonomy to teams. You don't have to behead hierarchies completely. You don't have to guillotine your bosses to have a more flat structure, or a flatter structure. You could move away from managers. You could have more self-managing teams. You could use Sociocracy, for example, as a principle, and have a team making a collective decision, especially when it's a small team. And then you don't have to have that higher paid manager bossing people around. That could be, those two things can go quite well together. If you've got a team of 5 of you, actually 5 people can definitely make a decision reasonably quickly, don't necessarily need a boss, who often is getting paid twice as much as any of them. So, that might sound a little bit scary for people in traditional businesses, but actually, who can you afford not to have? You often can't afford not to have your workers, i.e. your 5 people doing the work. Potentially you can afford to not have the person that maybe is spending a lot of their time with their feet up, or ordering other people around a bit too vociferously. So that would be another way. And I think empowering workers more is one of the easiest things that people could do as well. Like, you don't have to be a full-blown workers co-op. You don't have to be completely non-hierarchical. You don't even have to have equal pay, but just talking to your workers, actually, and listening to what they actually say as well. Really bringing workers into the center of things, and not just treating them like basically AI chatbots, the human equivalent of robots. Like, we're more than that. Humans are not resources. That's one of the slogans that we like here at Suma, is that we don't have HR because humans are not resources. Stop treating people like resources would be my one main thing for traditional businesses. The more you treat people like people, the more you get from those people, and the better you get towards a culture where people are empowered, happier to work better together. I think this is stuff that bosses and shareholders don't particularly want to hear, because it goes against the dominant narrative. It goes against the logic of the capitalist system, but so do we, and we're still here. I wish more businesses would take on some of that.
Yeah. So to explore that a bit further then, before we wrap up, what do you think are the greatest internal barriers, so internal to the organization, internal barriers within conventional businesses to adopting a more egalitarian
Oh,
workplace, be it pay, be it empowerment, be it worker ownership? What do you
yeah.
think that biggest barrier is, both internally, and then, a separate question would be, leading on from that, would be, what are the biggest barriers externally? What is preventing more co-ops from existing and from being sustained?
Yeah, so I think the second question is probably easier than the first in some ways, because I, I think it's just that people don't necessarily know about this as a business model. I think we're taught from a very young age that business is the one bloke with the top hat, or it's the dynamic person with the mobile phone making all the decisions, and it's very much individualistic, like our society is. And we don't offer people, even at business studies or younger than that, we don't offer people obvious alternatives. It's bosses and bossed, it's management and workers. It isn't the workers running it for themselves. People don't even know about that as an option. So visibility is the thing for that, and the barriers within those corporate businesses or more traditional businesses. I think often the barriers are the bosses. I think that workers need to work together to make their bosses redundant. That's probably putting it a bit strong, but work together to make your bosses unnecessary, show that it can be done. And then you don't necessarily need someone organizing you if you're organizing yourselves. If you're managing yourselves, why do you need a manager? That person isn't as necessary. But you could say the same about things in wider society. But I think within those businesses, often the barriers are the people in positions of power and privilege, and often vast amounts more pay. It's in their interests that that system continues, that hierarchy perpetuates. It's in their interests that we keep doing things the way we've always done them. We don't want people to dream anything outside of that, which is deeply sad, really, isn't it? like, like we need to dream a bit bigger. We need to dream a bit outside the box. Think outside the box at work and in society. This kind of thing can work, but people need to know about it. First of all, people need to know that it's a possibility from a very young age. We need to talk more about worker cooperation, about worker-owned businesses, about workers' control, workers' self-management. Talk more about that. Get on our soapboxes a little bit more, get on our megaphones a little bit more, maybe get into the halls of power a little bit more. I think actually the current government have shown more interest in this kind of business model. I'm probably a little bit too busy moving boxes to get too involved in that myself, but I know that some in the worker co-op movement have been engaging with proper politicians and all that. So, there might be some hope there. But yeah, people need to know about us, and younger generations particularly, because like I say, Suma's 1977, right? Like a lot of the people that started this particular movement and this particular group of cooperatives, a lot of those people are retiring or retired. The younger generation, Gen Z, they need to get into this kind of thing and start some worker co-ops themselves. Like there's a wonderful cafe in Huddersfield called The Hive, which is LGBTQ plus co-op, basically set up by a group of really young people. That's doing well. Let's see more of that kind of thing. Let's see young people taking on the business model and realizing that, yeah, you don't need to start a cafe as a owner, run it, doing it all on your own. You can do that with three mates, and as people can't afford to buy houses anymore, people are having to get a mortgage between four people because houses are so expensive. It might be that we see the same sort of thing with businesses more and more as well, that four of you in an egalitarian way start a business and run it democratically. I'd love to see that in the next 10 years.
And so, just to wrap up, what prevailing narrative about business does Suma's existence most directly challenge?
I think it is that narrative that you need bosses, management, shareholders, and essentially people taking a lot of the money without doing any of the work, or very much of the work. I think that's the narrative that Suma challenged in the 70s and is still challenging nearly 50 years later. I'm proud of us for doing that. No, I don't think, the Suma is not a passenger ship, basically. We can't afford to have, that upper class passenger. Here, we're a bunch of workers getting our hands dirty, getting the work done, and getting it done together. Solidarity isn't just a thing of the past either. I think that's something that we're proving that workers can do it for themselves together and do it well.
And who else is doing interesting work in this space that you think I should speak to?
Well, I would say that one of the most interesting things in the Worker Co-op calendar is the Worker Co-op weekend. So we get together once a year, all the Worker Co-ops in the UK, and that is happening in June. I believe it's the first week of June. I'm going to have to check that now because I'll be kicking myself if I don't. But yeah, the Worker Co-op weekend is probably the weekend of the year for the Worker Co-op movement. It's a place where you can get to meet all the different people that are doing really, really great stuff, because there are quite a lot of them in different parts of the country. There's a care co-op, which is amazing, that's doing care work differently. We've had breweries, there's tech co-ops, all sorts of different places trying this. There's other co-ops like Suma. There's the retail shops, so places like Single Step up in Lancaster, who I always shout out for. Let me just find when the Worker Co-op weekend is, because I'd be kicking myself if I didn't tell you that. I'm sure it's the first weekend in June, but just give me a second. Worker Co-op weekend 2026. Yeah, so it's at Thornbridge Outdoors, which is near Sheffield. It's actually in the Peak District, but it's near Sheffield, and that's the weekend of June the 5th to the 7th. I'd say that's the one place to be, even if you can only get there for a day. Come and see what Worker Co-ops are all about. It's a wonderful vibe. It's a really nice space. They were doing sort of wild swimming and, poetry and campfires and beer and workshop sessions, of course, throughout both days, the Saturday and Sunday. People camp. There's some sheltered accommodation as well. Yeah, really, really nice place to be for fellow worker cooperators. That's a great place to come and meet like-minded people. There's another podcast that I shout out to, which is Punch Card. That's well worth a listen. Caleb does some really good work on there. The Worker Co-op network as well is quite strong. So workers.coop is the name of the federation for worker co-ops, and they are the kind of best place to go. Your kind of one-stop shop for signposting out towards other worker co-ops. They'll know all the worker co-ops in the country, basically, and depending on which type of co-op you're interested in, or older ones, newer ones, or whatever, smaller ones, bigger ones, workers.coop will be able to signpost you and point you in the right direction, and any listeners as well, of course. So yeah, big shout out to workers.coop. They're the ones who organise the weekend.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me.
No, it's a pleasure.
Discuss all this. Yeah, really appreciate it. And I hope Suma continues to grow and in terms of people's awareness of it and all the great work that you're doing, and that the membership continues to grow as well. That you find those people who have that special blend.
Well, we've just found 6 of them, and really, really proud of them and how well they've done. So we're bringing those in soon. Yeah, we've got a lovely group of customers all around the country, which is amazing, and they're a wonderful group of workers here in Elland in West Yorkshire to work with. So I still feel lucky. I still feel grateful for Suma. I still feel privileged to come to work. So yeah, we can do things differently. We've been doing it for 50 years, and we ain't going to stop now. Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely.
Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.